Okay, well, I think we're going to get started, and good to see everyone here, and I'm sure we'll have a few more people slipping in as we get underway, and that's certainly fine. We are continuing in our study of the book of Luke, and we are getting close to the end. We only have 2 more chapters to go. Today we'll be mainly in Luke chapter 23, and then next week we'll be in Luke 24, talking about the resurrection 1 week before Easter, because I make no effort to ever time these things to do with anything. We're just going through chapter by chapter. So, last week, 2 weeks ago, because I was not here last week, we were in chapter 22, and of course we had seen in that chapter talked about the arrest of Jesus, Judas's betrayal, and the circumstances that how that betrayal took place, and Jesus' initial appearance before the council, and where they say to him at the end of chapter 22, "If you are the Christ, tell us." And he says, "If I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." And we'd seen that Jesus was directly referencing Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. The Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. That is a direct reference to Daniel, that passage in Daniel chapter 7. That's God himself. And so when Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man, he's actually not emphasizing his humanity. This is sort of a common sort of assumption that we make when we read just the text in isolation. We go, oh, he's referring to himself as human. Well, of course he's human. No one doubted that he was human at that time. When he's calling himself the Son of Man, and then he's referencing the clouds of coming with the clouds of heaven, he's actually attributing divine status to himself. And that is why in verse 71 of the last chapter, they say, "What further testimony do we need? We've heard it ourselves from his own lips." So that's where we had left off. So now if you have your Bibles, feel free to turn to Luke chapter 23, and we'll read the first few verses. "Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king.' And Pilate asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And he answered him, 'You have said so.' And Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, 'I find no guilt in this man.' But they were urgent, saying, 'He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place.'" So we see in verse 1, where it references the whole company of them, that whole company is referencing the entire Sanhedrin. That's the religious governing council, and that's approximately 70 men. So we've got the Sanhedrin, and we know that the vast majority of the Sanhedrin had agreed with this. We know that there were at least 2 dissenters, Nicodemus and, oh my goodness, I should remember the other name. Who's the guy that gave the tomb? Why should I wait? Oh, I don't remember that. Help me out. What? Sorry? Joseph of Arimathea. I wanted to say Bartimaeus, but I knew that wasn't right. Okay, Joseph of Arimathea. Sorry about that. Anyway, okay, so since Roman law did not permit the Sanhedrin to convict on capital offenses, Jesus is brought to Pilate. See, the Jews don't have the authority to execute someone. They do have laws that they're able to enforce. So, for example, they were able to enforce by penalty of law that if you don't pay your temple tax, you could be fined. But they did not have the authority to put someone to death. And so, hence they bring him to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. Now, Pontius Pilate's main headquarters was in Caesarea, some distance away. However, he resided in Jerusalem during the major festivals for a very simple reason. It was to maintain order during those times. Because during the festivals, you'd have large gatherings. If you're ever going to have a rebellion or an uprising, that's the opportune time. And so therefore, Pilate was in Jerusalem during those times. And to make the greatest possible impression on Pilate as to the seriousness of this case, the whole council came. So the whole Sanhedrin comes before Pilate. And you'll notice they make accusations against Jesus. And according to Luke, they make 3 specific accusations against him. They accuse him of misleading the nation, forbidding the people from giving tribute to Caesar, and claiming that Jesus himself, is king. So they're making 3 charges. So now that first charge, misleading the nation, that's a purely religious matter. Pilate would have no interest in that. And we see that actually later on in the book of Acts whenever you have these sort of religious charges that are brought before Roman authorities. The moment it has something to do with interpreting Jewish law, they're basically hands off, we're not interested. So, but why would they bring up that charge if they knew that Pilate wouldn't be terribly interested in that one? It could discredit Jesus among the people. Remember, they're also trying to whip up the crowd against Jesus. And so they're accusing him of misleading our nation. The second charge they make, forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar. Well, that one is a pretty simple one to answer. So the accusation is that Jesus said, don't pay taxes to Caesar. Is that charge correct? We know with 100% certainty that is a completely false charge. In fact, we read just a couple of chapters earlier where Jesus was asked this exact question. Each of the synoptic gospels references this, where he's asked the question, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And then Jesus, knowing their trick question, says, bring me a denarius. And he says, whose inscription is on it? And it's Caesar's. And he says, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And so the answer is yes, you pay your taxes to the government. You pay your taxes to Caesar. So that is plainly false, and that's easy to disprove. So far, not doing so well in terms of these charges. The first one wouldn't interest Pilate. The second one is easy enough to disprove because Jesus clearly had not forbidden paying taxes to the government. The third charge, that he claimed to be king of the Jews, that is the most serious of those 3 charges because it could directly challenge Roman authority. And you'll notice that's the charge Pilate focuses on. He doesn't even, in this dialogue here, he doesn't even reference the first 2. He simply goes straight for the question, are you the king of the Jews? That's all that Pilate is interested in here. And now Jesus responds by saying, you have said so. Jesus has responded this similarly. We see it in Luke chapter 22, verse 70, where they ask him, are you the Son of God? And he says, you say that I am. It's a common way of responding where you respond in the passive voice at that time, and it's kind of a way of putting the burden back on the questioner, going, think through the implications of your question. So are you the King of the Jews? Are you the Son of God? You have said so. Think it through what you're asking. Now, Luke is giving us an abbreviated version of the discussion, and we're going to briefly go to John chapter 18 just to see some broader context here, because often other gospel writers provide some more details, and this is a classic example where you can get more by looking at one of the other gospels to get some fuller context. So John chapter 18, and I'm going to go to verse 33, and we see the same discussion, but John fills out more details here. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not from the world. Then Pilate said to him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? So you see, in the broader context here, Jesus is responding, saying, you say that I am. Luke is recording accurately, but he's only giving an abbreviated version here. So if you look only at Luke's version, You sort of might be wondering why in verse 4 does Pilate so quickly say, I find no guilt in this man? Because at first glance, it might look like, well, Jesus is saying, yes, I am the king. And why would Pilate be like, yeah, I'm not really seeing anything here? But if you look at the broader context of what Jesus is saying, yes, Jesus is the king, but not in, at least not in that, he's not claiming to be a king in the earthly sense at that moment where he's going to overthrow anything. He's saying, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were of this world, my servants would have been fighting. And so it becomes obvious to Pilate that Jesus isn't a threat. He's not seeking to overthrow the Roman government. He's not seeking to overthrow any government at that point. And now, Pilate is no doubt confused by what Jesus is saying. And when Jesus says, as we see in John, he says, everyone who's of the truth listens to me. You know, Pilate's answer, what is truth? Now, again, we don't have the audio here. We don't know the tone in which Pilate said this. But I strongly suspect that Pilate's question was kind of a dismissive one, like what is truth? Like, what is this? I mean, you can think of Pilate as sort of like the first century postmodernist, you know, like sort of, yeah, you got your truth, I got my truth. Like, what is truth? Pilate's not really interested in this. This is not his thing. And so, hence we go in verse 4, back in Luke chapter 23 here. Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, I find no guilt in this man. Now, so Pilate is saying, like, look, I don't see anything that is worthy of death here. Now, some Christians, it's easy to fall into the trap, and most Christians I don't think fall into this, but it's not hard to sort of err on this side here, where you read this and you sort of go, Pilate seems like a pretty good guy. You know, he's trying his best, like the poor guy is kind of in a tough spot here. Let's not forget who Pontius Pilate was. He wasn't a good guy. He was really bad. There's a reason why the Jewish people absolutely hated him. The Jewish sources at that time, they considered Pilate's reign to be quite harsh, charging him with greed and cruelty. If you've ever watched the TV series called The Bible AD, or The Bible AD, The Bible Continues, something like that. It was a very good series on about 15 or so years ago, and I think it has a fantastic portrayal of Pontius Pilate, where you just see this guy's, oh, is he cruel? Like they just show episode after episode where like all the terrible things he does. Josephus, a Jewish/Roman historian who lived in the first century as well, he described, for example, that Pilate would bring pagan Roman legions into Jerusalem, bring the soldiers right into Jerusalem, and he would steal temple funds to build an aqueduct. I mean, this guy had very little in the way of ethics. And yet, even someone as bad as him, it's so obvious that Jesus is not guilty. That's the point here. But as you can see, the Jewish leaders, they're urgent, verse 5. He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea from Galilee even to this place. The people, these leaders, aren't satisfied with Pilate's answer, so they want to escalate things. They want to continue. And again, it just tells you just how much the crowd had been whipped up and how much these leaders, how hard their hearts are. And we've seen this throughout the Gospels, where these Jewish leaders are so hardened, nothing will convince them. Doesn't matter how many miracles happen, didn't matter when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, nothing will persuade them. And you see that quite clearly here as well, that even wicked Pilate, the guy who has no problem putting people to death at any time, like he executed a lot of people, even he is going like, you guys, there's nothing here. Like I have to have something. And there's not even Pontius Pilate was comfortable executing Jesus at this point. I'll pause here for a moment. Comments or questions? Okay, well, I'll carry on, and we'll go on to verse 6. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. the chief priests and the scribes stood by vehemently accusing him. And Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. So, Jesus is sent from Pilate. Pilate sees an opportunity to offload the responsibility to another level of government. Governments do this all the time, by the way, in case you're wondering. That's not a municipal problem. That's a provincial problem. You got to just go see them. Or that's a school to go see the school trust. Like, we do this. Anyway, Pilate does it too. He sees a great opportunity. I'll send Jesus off to Herod. Now, who's Herod? He's Herod Antipas. He's one of the sons of King Herod the Great. King Herod the Great, of course, was the king when Jesus was born. And Herod Antipas is the same Herod who beheaded John the Baptist. So that should give you your first clue. We're not talking about a great guy here. So this is the same guy who beheaded John the Baptist, the same one that was being called out for his immoral marriage by John the Baptist. And as we see here, he is interested in seeing Jesus because he had heard of his miracles. Pilate was hoping that, Herod was hoping that Jesus would perform a miracle. That's what we see here in verse 8, that he's very glad that the opportunity to see Jesus. He's hoping to see some kind of sign. He's hoping for a magic trick. So again, his motives are not pure at all. He's just sort of interested for the novelty factor. And you can see that he is offended by Jesus' silence. So he's questioning Jesus. Jesus is not answering him. And so Herod and his soldiers, it says, ridiculed him by clothing him in an elaborate robe and mocking the idea of him become a king. Now, Pilate had hoped that Herod would deal with Jesus since he belonged to his jurisdiction, but Herod returned him to Pilate. And so, as government groups tend to do, you tend to sort of, hey, actually it's under this jurisdiction, so we send him back over here. And now verse 12 is an interesting one. Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day. What is going on here? They'd been at enmity. They'd hated each other before. Now they become friends. What most commentators say is that Pilate's expedient gesture, like his sending Jesus to Herod, would have been interpreted by Herod as a sign of respect, of recognizing Herod's authority. Because remember, you've got the Roman governor and you've got the Jewish king, and those two don't usually get along. There's always a bit of a turf war happening. And so it's likely that Herod was probably honored by the fact that Pilate is respecting his jurisdiction, respecting his authority, and he's sending me this miracle work. I might get to see something here. And so, as a result, they become friends. How long that friendship continued, I don't know. But it is kind of interesting that Luke tells us this. Verse 13. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who is misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him." So we see here that Pilate references that, he says that, I've examined him. So we know that there's more discussion than what Luke records. We see some of that recorded by John, but there's probably even more discussion than that. The Bible doesn't give us everything. It gives us, like the basic summary here. And Pilate concludes, and he says, that Jesus is not guilty of anything deserving death. Even Herod examined him, and Herod agreed. So you've got wicked Pilate and evil Herod, two really bad guys, and even both of them are going, he's not deserving anything, of death. Now, and by the way, just to sort of prove the fact that before we get too far and going, well, Pilate's a really good guy here, he's really trying to help Jesus out, Notice what he says in verse 15. He says, or verse 16, I will therefore punish and release him. So even though I acknowledge he's not guilty, I'll whip him for you guys. Like, I'll do really bad, we'll punish him and all that. I just don't think we should go all the way to death here. But of course, we know that does not satisfy the people. Going on to the next verse here. But they all cried out together, away with him, away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus. But they kept shouting, crucify, crucify him. A third time he said to them, why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him. But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they'd asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. And you can see that at this point, the crowd has been whipped into a frenzy. Like there is no reasoning with a mob. And again, incited by the religious leaders, the Jewish leaders, and I think we all know this, you get sort of, when the mob gets going, there is no reasoning with the mob. Doesn't matter what type of mob it is or what kind of group it is. When you have a group of people that are whipped up in a frenzy, you can't reason with them. And so now we know that, for example, in Matthew 27, verse 15, Matthew references that there is a Jewish tradition that one prisoner per year would be released by the Roman governor. And so Pilate, presents sort of this choice, Barabbas or Jesus. Now, who is Barabbas? Well, Barabbas, as we read here, he had started an insurrection. So we got an actual rebel here, and he committed murder. So we've got a murderer and a rebel. Now, his name, Barabbas, in Aramaic, it actually means son of the father. And so some commentators suggest that perhaps he was a messianic pretender because, and he had taken that name upon himself, that I am the son of the father. So if that's true, you've got a rebel, you've got a murderer, and you have a fake Christ, all in one. He's really, this guy this is really bad. He deserves death. Like, he kind of meets all the criteria and more. And yet, they cry for him to be released. They demand that Barabbas be released. Now, I don't know how many of you have watched the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of the Christ. I remember watching it. I think the movie came out around 20 years or so ago. It's the kind of movie that most movies, no matter how bad the horror aspect is, usually there's moments where the tension gets relieved. The Passion of the Christ has almost no tension-relieving moments at all. It's the kind of movie that if you bring your popcorn in, you don't finish it. Like, it's just that kind of movie. But even in that movie, there is one, at least I caught one semi-humorous moment in the movie. One. And it was the moment where they're calling for Barabbas to be released. And you see Barabbas, and he's sort of out there, and he's just kind of got this grin on his face going, whoa, I lucked out here. I can't believe these suckers here. Like, that one moment. Because there is a little aspect of humor there that this guy is sort of going like, I can't believe my good fortune. But, obviously, so Barabbas, terrible individual, they would rather he be released. This is what happens when you get a mob whipped up, where people are kind of beyond all reason. Now, we know, by the way, the reason why the people were so whipped up, and I'm just going to quote here Matthew 27, verse 20, where it explicitly says, now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. So, lest anyone, and this is, if you ever sort of wonder, where does some of the history of anti-Semitism and Christian history come from? This is the type of area where it comes from, because many Christians throughout history, they read these passages here and they go, look how evil the Jews are. They called for Jesus to be executed, therefore we need to wipe them out. Terrible reasoning, absolutely wrong, because we know the text explicitly tells us that it was the leaders, it was the chief priests and the scribes, the ones whose hearts were hardened. They whipped up the crowd. Doesn't mean that the crowd is innocent, but it does mean that they were whipped into a frenzy by these leaders, and the worst thing we could possibly do is sort of assume, oh, that means that an entire race of people are bad. That would be completely wrong, complete misreading of the rest of the New Testament, by the way. I mean, read the book of Romans to see how much what Paul has to say about the Jews, and there's no anti-Semitism whatsoever. So anyway, those who had charged Jesus with rebellion against Rome, they've now asked for a real rebel to be released, demonstrating that their loyalty to Rome, that's obviously duplicitous, that's fake, because Barabbas actually was rebelling against Rome, and they're saying, yeah, we want this guy to be out. Now only Luke mentions that this rebellion took place in Jerusalem, which also helps explain the unanimous sentiment in his favor that they actually didn't have a problem with the rebellions at all. And as we see, although Pilate repeatedly tried to release Jesus, the crowd shout for him to be crucified. And so that which, is just something that they had just been in. And as far as what crucifixion is, and again, I think we're all generally familiar with it, but it was a particularly horrific form of slow execution in which the offender carried the crossbeam to the place of crucifixion and was fastened to it by rope or nails before being raised and secured to an upright post. Death would have occurred hours or sometimes even days later by suffocation, loss of blood and body fluids, or by cardiac arrest, like by a heart attack. And essentially what happens when you're positioned that way on the cross is you can inhale, but you can only exhale when you're able to lift yourself up with your legs. If you can't lift yourself up with your legs, you're not able to exhale. So as long as you can lift yourself, that's why you could live so long on the cross. It was horrible. It was the worst form of death that you could possibly have. And if they wanted to speed along the process, they'd come along and break the legs. That's why you see reference later on to they came by to break the legs of those on the cross, because then they couldn't lift themselves up anymore. So back to Pontius Pilate. He's faced with a choice between upholding justice or preserving his own position. He chose self-interest. He chose to preserve his own position, which is consistent with his character. As we see here, he delivers Jesus over to their will. Pausing there for a moment. Comments or questions? Okay, well, I will go on to verse 26. I'll read the next part here. And as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who is coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of the people and of women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" So all three of these synoptic gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they all mention Simon the Cyrenian. So what is going on here? Well, normally, as I mentioned earlier, someone being crucified would have to carry their own cross. So again, just adding to the humiliation. Like, you're going to be executed and you have to carry the instrument by which you are going to be executed. And that's why earlier on, when Jesus talks about, if anyone wishes to be my disciple and follow me, he must deny himself, pick up his cross and follow me, because it was widely known that if you're getting crucified, you carry your own cross. Now, Jesus, by all accounts, was unable to do so, probably due to the fact that he'd been weakened by his previous punishments. He had been whipped severely. He would have lost a significant amount of blood. So he would have been unable to carry it. And so Simon gets seized. It's not like he put his hand up and said, I volunteer. He gets seized, and he has to carry the cross for Jesus. Now, it references that there was a multitude of people and of women who were mourning and lamenting for him. And then Jesus he says to them, he talks about daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves. And then he quotes from Hosea chapter 10, verse 8. And I'm just going to go to that right now. Hosea chapter 10, verse 8, and this will sound familiar. Where it says, the high places of Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. Thorn and thistle shall grow up on their altars, and they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. So Jesus here is quoting from that, and what is he referencing here? Well, it's pretty clear that he's talking about the future destruction of Jerusalem. Only 40 years later, in 70 A.D., Roman forces were going to come in. They're going to surround Jerusalem. It's going to be a brutal couple of years of starvation where they're surrounded. And then the temple is going to be destroyed, like razed down to the ground. And people are going to die. It's going to be horrific. And so Jesus is, once again, prophesying what is going to happen to Jerusalem. Don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children and for what is going to happen to this. What is going to happen to this city? Now, now at the end here, let me just where Jesus references here. He says, "If they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" Well, again, what some of the commentators say is that since the green wood or tree representing Jesus is less susceptible to destruction by fire, the dry tree, which represents unbelieving Jerusalemites, would be even more readily consumed. In other words, if this thing is going to happen to someone who is righteous, imagine, the judgment that comes upon those who are not righteous. Is sort of the kind of is believed to be the reference here. Actually, I'm just going to briefly go to Ezekiel chapter 17, which Jesus references here. Ezekiel 17, verse 24, where again, this is where our Old Testament just kind of fills in the gaps. Ezekiel chapter 17, verse 24, and all the trees of the field shall know that I am the Lord. I bring low the high tree and make high the low tree, dry up the green tree and make the dry tree flourish. I am the Lord, I've spoken and I will do it. So again, you see the reference to the green tree and the dry tree. And again, people at that time, they would have been catching all these references because they know their scriptures. They know the Hebrew Bible. So when Jesus referenced these things, they would have understood it. Going on to verse 32. 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, where they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments. And the people stood by watching. But the ruler scoffed at him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself. If he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. So this crucifixion site was known as the skull, or Golgotha in Aramaic. The Latin translation of this is Calvary. So there's where we talk about Jesus was put to death on Calvary. That's the Latin translation for the skull, or Golgotha. And of course, because throughout, especially the Middle Ages and such, everything in the church was in Latin, it shouldn't be that surprising that some of the Latin words and phrases carry over today. So Calvary, a Latin phrase. And now the prayer by Jesus, where he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It does not absolve the people of the guilt, but it does show that they did not understand the full significance of what they are doing. That much we know. And the people have been whipped into this frenzy by the religious leaders, and who did know what they were doing, and they followed those leaders and made obviously a terrible choice. So how does this prayer get answered? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because obviously, I don't know of any scholar who interprets this as, automatic, complete forgiveness for everyone who had anything to do with the crucifixion of Jesus, no consequences. Because that's not, I don't know of any commentator that actually argues that. One very interesting interpretation of this comes from John MacArthur, and he suggests that we actually see this prayer answered in the mercy shown to the people in Acts chapter 2, when after Jesus' ascension, the Holy Spirit has come down, and Peter is preaching to the crowd, and thousands of people come to Jesus, and now they kind of understand. And so this is sort of that prayer, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. They come to him later, many of them, and they do receive forgiveness. So that's kind of, I don't know for sure if that's the correct interpretation of that, but I think it's a pretty good one. I think that has that makes a certain amount of sense here. Now, it references here in verse 34 as well. It says, they cast lots to divide his garments. And that fulfilled prophecy. In fact, many prophecies are fulfilled in this section here. So I'm just going to briefly go to Psalm chapter 22, verse 18. Widely recognized, Psalm 22, lots of messianic references here. Verse 18, it says, they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. This is a psalm of David. Now we see also that the people were scoffing and they were mocking him. Psalm chapter 22, verses 7 and 8. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. And when you read Psalm chapter 22, yes, it's a psalm written by King David, a psalm that would have been applicable in that time, but it also points ahead to the future, because you read that and you go, seems like there's way more going on here than just David's personal problems here. It looks like he is pointing ahead. This is one of those cases where you can have a double fulfillment of prophecy, where you have an immediate, partial fulfillment, where an immediate local context, and then you have a future messianic fulfillment. Kind of like when we did that when we were looking at Isaiah 7, verse 14, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear forth a son, or that there's that there would have been an event that happened at the time that would have partially fulfilled, but then you have the birth of Jesus, which is the complete fulfillment. We see here as well that Jesus is offered sour wine to sort of as a or sour wine vinegar. He refused it. Why? Probably because while it would have deadened the pain, it would also have impaired his mental faculties and enabled temptation to more readily overcome him, like temptation to despair. At the very end on verse 38, it has that there is an inscription over him. This is the King of the Jews. All four Gospels reference an inscription. All four Gospels say something slightly different. Luke says, this is the King of the Jews. One of the other Gospel writers says, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Another said, this is Jesus of Nazareth. And if you go to your favorite internet skeptic website, and you will find that they will say, see, look, it's a contradiction. Who knows what was actually on that inscription? Two things in response to that. First of all, I believe it's in John, it references that there was actually 4 inscriptions that were up, one in each language. You had Aramaic, and you had Latin, and or there would have been 4. There's 4 different languages, so you could have a slightly different translation from each one. But even besides all of that, if you actually take all the inscriptions that are referenced in the 4 Gospels, you actually get the full thing. This is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. You just put them together, and there you go. Each gospel writer gives us a section of it. They don't contradict, because they're not saying this is the only thing that was on it. They're just highlighting the part they choose to highlight. Anyway, I don't really dwell on that one. It's just kind of interesting, and it's just because, go to a skeptic website. They will point this out. This is a big contradiction. This is one of the easiest ones to answer. I'm surprised this one still gets used, because there's much harder ones on that one. Going on to the next part here, and then open up some questions. Verse 39, 39. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." So it mentions that there is these thieves on these two different thieves on both sides of his cross. Now, other gospel writers reference, both thieves mocking him. And does that contradict with what Luke is saying? No, because it doesn't say here that the second thief was, I guess, nice to him the whole way through. It's entirely possible that the second thief may have mocked him initially and then came to his senses. Again, that's certainly possible. He asked Jesus to remember him, when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says, that you will be with me in paradise. Now, the Greek word translated paradise, paradisios, it generally means garden, but it can refer to heaven as the future dwelling place of God's people. So, yes, it can refer to like a garden, but it also can refer to the final end state too. So, I'll quote here from Revelation chapter 2, verse 7. If I don't have the right... yes, I do have it here. "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God." That's the same Greek word, paradisios. So, in terms of what was Jesus promising to the thief on the cross, I'll briefly comment on that, and then I'll sort of zero in on what I think the key point is, because I'm going to point out there's a difference of opinion here among Christians on this. In terms of was the emphasis here that Jesus, was he promising, as soon as you die, in the intermediate state, you're with me in a special, in paradise, in spirit form, and so therefore today you will be with me in paradise? That is the majority view among Christian scholars. There is a minority view, however, that says actually the punctuation doesn't appear in the Greek. There is no punctuation in the Greek. They don't have commas and periods. Bible translators, you kind of make your best guess as far as where the commas and the punctuation should go. We have that in English. They didn't have that in the Greek. So you can read this as, "Truly I say to you, today you'll be with me in paradise," or you can read it as, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." In other words, is the today emphasizing you'll be with me in paradise in the intermediate state right now, or is it referencing, I'm saying to you now, you will be with me in heaven in the end state and such? Difference of opinion among Christian scholars. The minority view is that the comma should appear one after. The bigger issue, however, is to note here that regardless of the exact timing, of the sequence here, you have a guarantee to this thief, and the guarantee is that you're going to be with me in paradise. You're saved, and you'll notice what the thief didn't have the opportunity to do. You'll notice that he didn't get baptized. There's no indication here he got baptized. There's no baptism happening for this guy. He didn't go to any Sunday school. He didn't attend any church. As far as we can tell, he didn't do a single good deed his entire life. Like nothing. This is kind of our textbook example of faith alone. Now, suppose for a moment that for whatever reason that his sentence had suddenly been commuted and then he was allowed off the cross to go back living his life. I am 100% certain he would not have been the same man, because the fact that Jesus made that guarantee to him means he had genuine faith, and genuine faith always changes you. In the thief's case, he didn't get the opportunity to live it out. He didn't get a chance to join a cell group and start studying his Bible and all that. Like, by all accounts, he died on the cross within a short time after Jesus with no opportunity to do a single good work, and yet he is saved 100% by faith alone, by grace alone. And should be great comfort to us that even at the last second, it is possible for someone to be saved. Who knows how many people that have rejected Christ, at least by all external accounts. It is possible, even in that last moment before they die, we don't know. Maybe they came to Christ. It worked. This guy did, and chances are most of the people you know that you're hoping get saved and you're not sure if they ever did, chances are they didn't do as much bad stuff as this guy did. And he got saved, even though he had no chance to live it out afterwards. And so it doesn't mean that it has happened in each case, a person that we know, but it does mean it's possible. So don't lose. So that's why at a funeral, if you're called to sort of speak at a funeral and there's no evidence that person was a Christian, it would be a bad idea to give a sermon about, I'm 100% certain that person's in hell and here's what they're going through. Because you actually don't know that with 100% certainty, because maybe they ended up like the thief on the cross, and then, whoops, you meet them in heaven, you go, yeah, sorry, I kind of misrepresented what happened to you there. It's a little awkward. So, but it's a good reminder to us that salvation is based only on grace. As Pastor Walter had mentioned during his sermon today, it's faith alone. That's it, zero, nothing else. The thief had nothing else to add to it. So I'll pause there, open it up for any comments or questions.
So with this, I tell you today,
Yeah.
JW, in their Bible translation, they have the comma shifted.
Yep.
I tell you today.
Yes.
I think there is a very important theological point to be made. So look at the Nicene Creed, which says that Jesus died and he descended into hell, which begs the question, did Jesus go to paradise with this thief on the cross, or did he descend into hell? I mean, Christianity throughout history has been divided on this. I personally would much more take the position that Jesus did go to paradise.
Yep.
That it is an intermediate state where the saints await, looking at the story of Lazarus and the rich man. They also went, one went to Hades and the other one went to paradise. I think there's a deep significance here in the way the Bible was translated here, and that it is, I tell you today, or I tell you today you will be with me in paradise.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. If those who didn't hear, the question is just sort of referencing the Nicene Creed, referencing Jesus descending into hell, and that there's theological importance in referencing that it was today that Jesus and the thief went into paradise. That's a fair point. That is certainly the majority view. What I would say on that is just in terms of even the Nicene Creed, where he descended into hell. There's multiple words that get translated hell in the New Testament. There's actually 3 different words that get translated hell. You've got Hades, Gehenna, and Tartarus. And Hades is the approximate equivalent of the Old Testament Sheol. It's the place of the dead. Everyone goes to Sheol. Jacob, you go to Genesis chapter 37, where Jacob, when he's all distraught over he thought Joseph died, he says, I will go to Sheol. Like I'm going when I go to the grave, then so everyone goes to Sheol. So he descended into the grave. He descended into the place of the dead. In terms of it's not he descended into Gehenna. It's not the word which is being referenced. There's room for legitimate debate on the timing here. I'm sort of more focusing on the point remains the same as far as it's by grace alone that you're saved, and the thief gets paradise. As far as the exact timing, I mean, I don't think that's the primary point, but I respect the point here. Most Bible translations put the comma over here, and you can argue for the comma to go in the other spot, but I'm not going to get hung up over a comma either way. But I get your point. It's a fair point. Other comments or questions? Okay, well, I'll go on to verse 44. And it was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. Well, the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And after saying this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, Certainly this man was innocent. And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle when they saw what had taken place returned home, beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. Now, where it says it was about the 6th hour, that means it was dark. That's noon. That's the 6th hour. It was dark from noon until about 3 p.m. It's about 3 hours of darkness. We know this is not a solar eclipse. How do we know this? Well, Passover is part of the lunar calendar. There was no solar eclipse happening right then. This is a supernatural event. This one there is no eclipse that happens at this time that you can point to. This raises the question of, are there any secular historians who can confirm this? Well, first of all, that's sort of overstating the degree to which secular historians wrote about these things and by which their records were actually still preserved. But there were Christian writers who several centuries later quoted from Roman historian Thallus. And they quoted Thallus as describing a 3-hour period of darkness during this time, and Thallus even offering up some possible explanations for it. We don't have Thallus's writings, unfortunately. They haven't been preserved. All we have of his writing is what was quoted by Christians centuries later, but at that time, when the Christians were quoting it, obviously Thallus's writings were still around, and they felt comfortable referencing it. So I would suggest that there is at least some outside confirmation of this period of darkness. Jesus here quotes from Psalm chapter 31, verse 15. Again, he's quoting from Psalms here. My times are in your hand to rescue you from my hand of my enemies, my persecutors. Oh, I might have written down the exact verse incorrectly here, because I know it's in one of these verses here. It has, into your hands I commit my spirit. Sorry, must have typed in the wrong one. You'll note the reaction of the centurion and the fact that the crowds were distraught at what had happened. This is the point where they start to realize that I think we've done something wrong. The centurion says, certainly this man was innocent. We know that other things happened during this time. The curtain of the temple is torn into two. That's referenced in the Gospel of Matthew. There's all this happening at the same time here. Going on to verse 50, because I'm just about out of time. Now there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea. He was a member of the council, a good and righteous man who had not consented to their decision and action, and he was looking for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid him in a tomb cut in stone, where no one had ever yet been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath, they rested according to the commandments. So we're not left guessing here. Joseph of Arimathea, what kind of guy was he? He's a good and righteous man. So being a member of the ruling council didn't make you bad. There were good people in that council. Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, and he asks for the body of Jesus. Now, burial in first century Israel usually involved placing the body into a small cavity cut into a natural rock outcropping. Once the body decomposed, the bones would be gathered and reburied in a pile with other deceased family members, or placed in a limestone box called an ossuary. And so that was sort of the normal burial procedure. So first in that tomb, and then once the decomposition has happened, the bones are placed in the ossuary. The burial place of Jesus is most probably the traditional site known as the Holy Sepulchre, which is located just outside of the first century wall. And again, Luke tells us the timing here. It's the day of the preparation. The Sabbath was beginning. The women have prepared spices and ointments. And it tells us, but on the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. That, of course, is referencing commandment number 4 in the 10 commandments. And as far as what happened next, we'll have to wait in suspense until next week. If you want to read ahead, go ahead. But this is not a great ending if it doesn't continue. So hopefully there's something else yet. 2 very quick points of application. One, obviously we must never downplay the seriousness of Jesus' death. What he went through is horrific. And what he did for us is sort of beyond all measure. And reading this is a good way to remember that. And 2, going back to my point about the thief on the cross, remember, there is always hope while someone is alive, even until their last breath. There is always hope. Don't lose hope. And even after they've died, you don't know what went through their mind at the last second. You do not know the 100% certainty that they're unsaved. There are some characters in the Bible we know with 100% certainty because it tells us, but none of the people nowadays are directly described there. So you don't know, and so the thief on the cross, I think it's really good that that's in there because it gives us some really good hope that there are some people in heaven that we're going to be totally shocked, and because of God's grace, they repented at the last second and they made it in by the skin of their teeth, just like the thief on the cross, and we're going to be really happy to see them. Comments or questions? Okay, well, I will close with prayer because we're at 12, and then next week we're in Luke chapter 24. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you again that we can study your word. And Lord, I just first thank you for what you did for us on the cross. Let us never lose sight of the significance of what you've done and what it cost for you to die for us, for our sins. And Lord, I just ask as well that we all know people that we hope get saved. And I just thank you that that we have the assurance that even at the last moment, if they believe in you, they can be saved. And help us not to lose hope in those that we're hoping come to you. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.